Thank you very much. So the focus of what I wanted to talk about today picks up on a couple of things that I talked about briefly and speedily in my recent public lecture, if you happen to catch it, around children's digital activity and engagement and what role self-regulation might have in that. So I get to go a lot deeper today, and this is an area that I'm really interested in, and there's some really interesting findings emerging. But one of the reasons that I'm particularly interested in it is this is a leading problem for so many families, for policymakers. It's something that we're really grappling with in contemporary society. So, without further ado, the research that I'm going to present today draws on what Essie mentioned, the AIC Center of Excellence for the Digital Child. In 2020, when I was at University of Wollongong, we were lucky enough to be awarded Center of Excellence funding. Now, what Center of Excellence funding is in the Australian context is a large grant for a comprehensive and integrated program of research from multiple institutions. So there were 5 participating universities. There was something like 50 different chief investigators or something to that magnitude across those institutions. The idea being that it's trying to foster, number one, a critical mass of coordinated research on topics that are of critical relevance to Australian, but also global society. And also fostering the next generation of researchers in that area as well. So there's a substantial chunk of that money that's devoted to postdoctoral research fellows and PhD scholarships and those sorts of things. So we're still in the midst of that journey. 2020, the center will likely continue through to the end of 2028. There's even potential for rebids, which give you a new 7 years if your rebid is successful to continue on with new questions to build on the work that you've already built on. Now, if you heard my public lecture, I apologize that I'm going to cover this ground again, but because the area of self-regulation is subject to so much debate about what self-regulation even is and how we define it and what the boundaries are of self-regulation, I always feel it's important to say what I mean by self-regulation when I'm talking about it, how I conceptualize it and how I operationalize it. There are a number of key elements to the way that I think about and research self-regulation. One of them is it needs to have control. There are some conceptions of self-regulation that arguably are a little bit more adjacent to self-directedness. I chose to do it. The conceptions of self-regulation that I'm interested in mean that there's something difficult. There's an impulse or a reaction or a distraction that I need to overcome. So there's that element of control. And the reason that I'm trying to control that is because it's incompatible either with situational requirements or my goals. If I do this thing, it's going to take me off track from what the situation requires of me or where I was aiming to go. It's pulled me away. So those are some of the key ingredients to the self-regulation construct that I tend to focus on. And those impulses, those reactions, those distractions could be attentional, they could be cognitive, they could be behavioral, they could be emotional. So why that? Of the 384 different conceptions of self-regulation or terms for self-regulation that Jeremy Berman and team identified, why do I pick off this one? Well, we know in the moment it's really important for children. So based on this conception of self-regulation and the way that we measure self-regulation imperfectly, along with this conception, children who are higher in this ability are better able to sustain their attention. They're better able to delay gratification. They can stop things that they might not want to stop. They're playing something, but it's lunchtime and they need to pack up. They can pack up and come to lunch and do the thing that they can start doing things that they might not want to start. It's time to brush your teeth. I don't want to brush my teeth, but they can start doing things that they might not want to. So that control over reaction or impulse or distraction. But there's other reasons too. So I won't go to the same level of depth, but research establishes that this conception of self-regulation is highly predictive of very longer term outcomes from early childhood. Terry Moffat's is one of the first studies that demonstrate this. They captured self-regulation between ages 3 to 8, showing that 3 decades later, It predicted health, wealth, and criminality, and a whole range of other outcomes. That is, early self-regulation abilities was predicting those outcomes 3 decades later. You couldn't figure out why, because it was a longitudinal design rather than an interventional one. But it situated self-regulation as a priority target for us. We also know it's a leading concern for families. There are surveys all around the world, and these two swap, which is why I like talking about this one in particular, where the leading concern is either children's self-regulation, big behaviors and big emotions or related concepts, or their screen time and screen use. And depending on the survey, they'll change places, which one's number one, but those two are always rising towards the top. Self-regulation is increasingly emphasized in curricula, so is digital activity in many ways, and it's a leading concern for educators. We also see that it's prominently featured in public discourse, and that one of those elements of that public discourse is what I'm going to talk about today. But just to say, this is one sort of slice of my interest in self-regulation. My interest in self-regulation goes much broader, but one of the directions that it's taken me, particularly with the Center of Excellence for the Digital Child, is what role for self-regulation in children's digital choices, their digital activity, and the interactions and reactions that surround their digital engagement. So at the start, at the outset of the Center of Excellence, there was this question: what role for self-regulation? What do we know about that? And that hadn't been something that we really tried to reconcile as a field. There were all sorts of different studies. In fact, when we reviewed the literature, there were 187 different studies that we had identified that measured some aspect of self-regulation and some aspect of children's digital recreation. Say recreation because we were looking at things that weren't in school or instructed by school, a homework or a particular digital activity that was mandated of the child, but the digital activities that they have some reasonable say in whether or not they do. So lots of research, but that research seems to be reasonably detached from the public discourse that surrounds it. So in media reports, at the same time, I hear that children's ability to sustain their attention is dropping because of little snippets of content, and they can't focus for as long. So we've got this implication of digital activity impacting children's ability to self-regulate, or at least attentional aspects of their self-regulation. We also see arguments in the reverse direction that children can't handle these forms of digital activity. They don't have the self-regulation abilities to deal with what the digital content is. But I'm not sure that we necessarily know what the chains of causation are. Probably they're bidirectional, but I don't know that at this stage we had those sorts of insights about what's influencing what and in what aspects of children's digital activities self-regulation implicated. So we set out to review that work. 183 studies that we identified that captured some aspect of children's self-regulation and some aspect of their digital engagement. We were intentionally broad. We wanted a big and ambitious set of studies to say, what is everything we know about how these things relate? And I had grand visions of the sorts of insights that we might glean. Does self-regulation relate to the things that children choose digitally? Does it relate to the things that they do within that digital play? Does it relate to how long they do it for? Does it relate to how susceptible they are to things like persuasive design within digital products? Unfortunately, although we opened our search parameters to allow for that breadth, that's not the breadth that we found. It could be any article that was published in history ever that was indexed by one of the 5 different databases we looked at. Our digital rec terms were intentionally broad to capture anything and everything, digital play and digital recreation and app and tablet and iPad and every manner of term, and then all the different permutations of self-regulation. What we found are basically 2 clusters of research, one on self-regulation related to children's screen time, and those would often break it down, screen time globally across all different devices and activities, or studies that would segment that out. TV viewing time, time on social media, time on a tablet, time gaming, and they'd separate it out that way. Or associations with problematic digital engagement. In a minute, I'll unpack what they mean by problematic digital engagement. Let me start with the associations with screen time. So in public discourse, there's a lot of implication of self-regulation in children's screen time, that it's harder for them to put it down, they play for longer, that children aren't equipped with the self-regulation abilities, the skills to be able to deal with these digital products. If we look at screen time, just the total amount of time that they spend on those devices, the pooled correlation was negative 0.12. Really quite small, significant, but kind of the order to the correlation that you would find between height and intelligence, like not the sort of consequential association that we're really trying to make meaning out of. So the screen time associations, they did range. So for gaming, it was smaller, negative 0.06. For social media, it was higher, negative 0.15. But even still, all of them were in the quite small range that we really want to be cautious about overinterpreting. Where we did see some stronger associations with self-regulation with problematic digital engagement. So problematic digital engagement could be the patterns of play. It could be the level of disruption to children's daily activities, and it was interfering with the things that they needed to do. It could be the rumination around digital activity, that they think about it a lot, or there's persistent requests for it. There's big emotional reactions surrounding refusal or transition away from digital devices. And that's where we see some stronger associations for self-regulation. Problematic digital engagement globally was negative 0.29, but we see some of the strongest ones with social media and mobile phone use. We also see it with a few problematic or risky digital behaviors, communicating with strangers online, sexting. So we see some associations there, not rising to the same sort of level, but still a little bit stronger than when we focus on time as our construct. Disappointingly, that's about all of the studies we found. A lot of studies, but a lot of studies on those two clusters of things, which for me left a lot of questions unanswered. I wanted to know whether self-regulation was related to children's ability to delay digital activity. What if there's a request for digital activity and whoever, parents say, not yet, we can do it later. What's the reaction to that? Or what about when it's time to turn it off and we need to transition away from a device? Is there a role for self-regulation there? Does self-regulation have some role in the things that children choose? Will they tend to choose riskier things or qualitatively different things? And does to persuasive design vary with self-regulation abilities as well? So I had all sorts of questions that aspirationally we were hoping to answer through this, and the literature just didn't exist. I want to carve off one of those pieces, just one of those questions, and that's susceptibility to persuasive design. A lot of the public discourse around children's recreational digital engagement is related to the sorts of features that we see in the physical devices, but also the software design features that we see. What we know, and it's been characterized as a digital Wild West, is that there's this explosion of content options, digital content options for young children that is outpacing our answers to the sorts of questions we might have about those options. One of the things that's been documented in that explosion of digital media options for children or designed for children is persuasive design, which are digital design features in, let's say, the app for shorthand now, those digital design features that aim to influence your decision making. It wants you to invest something of a particular kind. It wants you to play for longer, or come back quicker, or choose this thing, not that thing, or watch this ad, or tap this button. I should say that there are other categories or terms that are used to characterize this as well. Some permutation of deceptive design or dark patterns. Those sorts of definitions tend to hinge on intent. So they were crafted to mislead or manipulate, and they hinge on that is for the benefit of the service provider, the app developer, whoever is monetizing the app, at the expense of the best interests of the user. I think that's a really interesting area of research, and ours sort of overlaps with that. Arguably, persuasive design is a bit broader than that, because it includes some features that might not be so intentionally manipulative. It also gives us the opportunity to dodge this argument of how do we know the intent of the developers when we can't speak to them. So persuasive design allows us to say there are these design elements that seem specifically targeted at getting you to do particular things that might not have been the things that you would have otherwise done. So the question is, we don't yet know which things are actually persuasive. What does it persuade you to do? To what extent is it persuasive? And is it persuasive equally to everyone, or who is it persuasive for? So there's all of these questions, and we have an intuition about these things. We probably experience a number of them that get us to play longer or do particular things that we might not have otherwise. Spend money on something in an app that later you're like, oh, why did I do that? I didn't need that. That wasn't worth it. It's equally unclear if and how self-regulation might fit into that equation. Now, I wanted to bring to life some of what I mean by persuasive design. What does this look like? You might have seen some, but I want to give some real world examples from apps that were designed for children based on their categorization, just so we can bring to life what is it that we're talking about. I've got a couple stills and a couple short videos because they take very different forms. These are examples that were encountered, and shout out to Daniel Johnson, who led this study, and the team that we worked with. These were examples that we encountered in a content analysis of the top 10 free apps and the top 10 paid apps on the App Store, and looking based on Gray's ontology, what different persuasive design elements were in each of those. These are some characterizations of some of the things we encountered. In this app, you can see, and it shows a sequence that wouldn't immediately be apparent. On the wall is this picture of a cat with sunglasses. By all appearances, it just looks like some aesthetic to the game. It's something that makes it more colorful or draws some attention. It's actually an ad. If you tap on that, you wouldn't know it, but if you tap on that, what comes up is a parental control to say, do you want to leave the app and go to this other purchase page? Now, the way that you need to get through that parental control to get to that page is what's 4 plus 9, or some equivalent to what's 4 plus 9. If you can do that, you will go to that next screen to say, do you want to download this other app that is not the app that you were playing and could well have a charge associated with that app? So these are disguised ads. They're ads that are inbuilt into the game that you wouldn't otherwise know that they're intended as advertising, or that they would take you somewhere else. You've probably encountered things like bundling or pressured selling or reference pricing or time limited reduced pricing. Things like if you buy these 5 things, you get 40% off. Or for the next 12 seconds, if you press it right now, I'll give you 10% off that purchase price. These are other persuasive design features that are getting you to try and invest resource, either your time, your attention, your money, or you're the money, in that you're giving your attention to things that are going to make the developers money. Here's another one. Now, I want to say at the outset that this is with very little engagement with this app. So this is the launching of the app and very few taps. So this is just what the app does. And then when there are breaks in that, it's a single tap on the thing that would take you to the next bit of the play.
Hello, hola, bonjour, and ni hao. Welcome to our new home. In case you're just tuning in, I'm Barbie Roberts, and I am So excited, I don't even know where to start. Follow me and my friends on an exciting adventure in the dream house. Welcome to delightful Malibu, California. Sun, surf, sand, let's go to the beach. Let's splash in with all of our friends. Malibu. When you join the Dream House VIP Club, you'll unlock all of the characters and their outfits. VIP Club members get more points in every. Simply tap the icon right in the middle of the screen. When you join the Dream House VIP Club, you'll unlock all of the characters and their outfits. VIP Club members get more points in every book. Your phone is packed with news. Check it out. Sun, surf, sand, let's go to the beach.
All right, I'll pause there because I think you get the theme that we're seeing there. I played it a bit longer than I would normally play a clip, just so you could see how inundating it can be at times with very little interaction with the app. The things that will come to you that are trying to override what you might have done otherwise and persuade a particular choice, a particular decision, get you to pay attention to something in particular. There's an interesting question, and I'll present one more clip, and this will be my last clip. There's an interesting sort of philosophical and pragmatic question of is there a time or place or context in which we're okay with these things and we're not? So the next clip that I show is educational programming. This is the free version of an educational app that is meant to teach mathematics, and there's various different games in there. Not quite as splashy. I'll foreshadow as the Barbie option, but let's watch this one.
You do not have any free activities left today. Please ask a grown-up for help. You would need a grown-up's help here.
In case you can't read it, you just need to enter your birth year, get to the parental control here. Anyways, I put that for a philosophical question in the back of your minds to contemplate and to situate this broader field. That are there conditions under which we're okay with some of these things, and are there conditions under which we're not? For instance, if you're trying to learn a new language and Duolingo is hassling you that you haven't practiced in a little while, are we okay with that then? And when are we not okay with it? I don't have the answers, but they're interesting questions. Anyways, there's all sorts of persuasive design features of different kinds and different prevalence across apps for children. There's a range of different content analyses that present these. This is our most recent one, led by Daniel Johnson and colleagues. Also, I cite one here by Samudu Malawachi, and those demonstrate the diversity and extent to which we see persuasive design in apps for children. Just isolating a couple findings here. So we have the top 10 free apps are the F1 to 10, and then the top 10 paid apps are the P1 to 10. And the dots indicate which of the persuasive design elements from Gray's ontology that they had. And we see two particularly prominent ones across these apps, not exclusively, but pay to play, that you need to pay something to be able to unlock particular content, or in some cases, to play at all beyond the first few minutes. And disguised ads was the most prevalent across them. Those things like the cat picture on the wall that you wouldn't know leads you to some sort of advertising or request for purchase. I am heartened to be able to say that there were apps that didn't have any persuasive design features at all that we could discern. This was after 8 minutes of routine gameplay. So you start and you engage with the app as you normally would in good faith and say, what do you see that you can discern as those persuasive design elements? Of course, you could miss some. How are you going to figure out everything's a disguised ad or not? But there were some apps with no discernible persuasive design in that period of time. Those tended to be in the paid apps. We saw a lot more persuasive design in the free apps, as you might anticipate. And it was by no means an exclusive case. Paid apps also had persuasive design elements. So we know that they're quite prevalent and they're quite diverse. What we don't know is, what do they persuade you to do? And do they all persuade the same sorts of things? Are they all equally persuasive? And do they persuade us all equally? So this was one of the questions that we had, and whether self-regulation might be a protective factor against some of these decisions. The problem is we didn't have really great ways to go about trying to investigate this, to capture it. How do we know what children do within the apps? These are commercially available apps. Unless we're watching over and we're trying to record, here's the thing that they tapped and when they tapped and here's what the options were. That's quite complicated. And then how do we get at those phenomena that we hear from families all the time? The big reactions when it's time to transition away from a digital device or when digital requests are refused. So this required us to build some new paradigms that didn't exist before and try and validate those. So one of the ones that I'll talk about today is a digital disengagement paradigm. But a little bit about the method. So what we did, this was an experimental design where we gave children 7 minutes. Well, I'm testing my memory now. 7 minutes of play with an app, but they were randomly assigned to one of 3 different app conditions. And those apps varied on the persuasive design diversity and number of instances. So based on previous content analyses, we identified an app that was low in persuasive design. It had very few instances of persuasive design, a moderate, and a high, based on those extensive content analyses. We tried to match to the extent that we could the nature of the apps. They were all about caring for an animal. We can't control everything because they're not our apps, so they're not identical and only vary in that persuasive design element. But we did try and match as much as we could. Now, in addition to what are the things that children did in the context of this persuasive design, different levels of persuasive design, I mentioned that we also designed a digital disengagement paradigm. We were interested in whether playing apps with different levels of persuasive design led to different reactions when it was time to stop playing with those apps. Now, we can't perfectly approximate the ecological home condition of it's time to turn off the TV or stop playing with whatever digital device or content, but we wanted to get as close as possible. So here's what we did. We told children they were going to get to play with the app however they wanted for a period of time. That period of time was 7 minutes. When we got to the 6-minute mark, we sat with them beside the child. This was in a children's museum, so not at home, but not in a lab either. It was a children's museum where they come to play, and this was a form of teacher play, a sort of pseudo separate space. They were going to get 7 minutes to play with the app however they wanted, just play with it. We sat there quietly minding our own business, busying ourselves with paperwork while they played. At the 6-minute mark, what we did is we said, you have 1 minute left, and then I'd like you to turn it off, and we're going to go to the other side of the room because we have some other activities to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this sand timer. And when it runs out, that means it's 1 minute, and I'd like you to turn it off and come see me over here. And then we proceeded to the other side of the room. We use the sand timer very explicitly. One is we didn't want to conflate conceptions of time and just how much is a minute and how well do I understand how long 1 minute is. We also didn't want something so overt as it's beeping in your ear by setting like a phone timer where it would go off, and it's a very jarring sort of alert that the time's up. But it's still something that would signal to you time is up. You don't need to know what a minute is. You just need to have some level of attention to it and monitor it reasonably well, and then move on if you notice that it's elapsed. And here's what we found. So even in the low persuasive design condition, on that digital disengagement paradigm, children on average disengaged about a minute after the timer had run out. So we gave them that sort of prompt. I should mention that at the 2-minute mark, if they hadn't disengaged from across the room, we gave them a reminder to say, oh, the time's up. Could you turn off the device and come join me over here at the other side of the room? If they still hadn't 1 minute later, then we went over and gently turned off the device for them and brought them with us to the other side of the room. So by the end of 10 minutes, it was well and truly off and done. So that was our maximum. So children in the low persuasive design condition played for 1 minute beyond the sand timer elapsing. In the moderate persuasive design condition, we saw significantly longer mean play time than we did in low persuasive design, an extra half a minute longer than we saw in low persuasive design. Curiously, the high persuasive design was more and significantly more, but not quite as much more as the moderate persuasive design. In fact, in a lot of ways, the moderate and high persuasive design conditions in our data looked very similar. So we ended up collapsing those two for a number of our analyses, the low versus moderate to high. And here's some of what we found in terms of what it meant for children's playtime. So for children who were lower in self-regulation, when we start to ask about this interaction with child self-regulation, for children low in self-regulation, when they experienced a moderate or high persuasive design app, they took 87% longer to disengage than children with low self-regulation who had a low persuasive design app. So children low in self-regulation with low persuasive design disengaged significantly quicker than children low in self-regulation with a moderate or high persuasive design app. So the persuasive design seemed to influence the timing to disengage for those low in self-regulation. Children with lower self-regulation that saw moderate or high persuasive design took 98% longer to disengage than did children with high self-regulation who also engaged with moderate or high persuasive design. So when you look at the same sorts of apps that were playing the identical apps, children who were higher in self-regulation disengaged faster than children who were lower in self-regulation. In fact, children with high self-regulation disengaged similarly regardless of the persuasive design level. There was no significant difference in their disengagement time or the independence of their disengagement. We also did a qualitative coding on whether they disengaged independently, whether they required a verbal reminder, whether they required us to physically turn it off. So we had a 5-point coding scheme as well. There's no significant difference across any persuasive design condition in their independence or time of disengagement. But in fairness, those apps differ on all sorts of things beyond just their persuasive design. In fact, we kind of see that in the data where we might expect high persuasive design, you play for even longer and you do more things, and it was non-significantly but slightly less than the moderate, which really requires that we can more carefully manipulate persuasive design and only persuasive design. I think the likelihood of us getting some of the apps that I profiled before and being able to adjust those is low. So we decided that we need to set out to build our own. Something that would mimic children's play, digital play, digital construction, digital engagement, but we could safely and carefully manipulate persuasive design and only the persuasive design element. We needed to build something that we could be comfortable with, that philosophically we could hand to heart say, I don't mind that children are playing this thing. So it needed to be something creative, constructive, and productive, rather than we toyed around with trying to approximate a range of different apps that are out there, continuous runners and all sorts of different kinds. But we wanted something that we felt we were comfortable children playing with for the purposes of our research. So we created a Storymaker app, and we called it Giggle Scribbles. So Giggle Scribbles allows us to toggle on and off different persuasive design conditions when the story creation procedure is otherwise identical. The things you see The order that you see them in, what happens in the app, the only thing that changes is whether that persuasive design element is present or absent in each of those conditions. So then we can start to investigate the individual effects of persuasive design. We can start to investigate the interactive or cumulative effects of layering multiple forms of persuasive design. We can start to look at, because we can capture the data within the app, we can see what children pick and when they pick it. So then we can start to look at, does it influence what choices children make within their digital engagement as well? And we can start to look at what are some of the conditions that sit around this. So I'll quickly sort of unpack the Giggle Scribbles app so you can see where persuasive design sits and where it toggles on and off. So we start with a home screen, but the very first decision that you make is whether to, which character you want to pick. You have a choice of 8 different characters. Because we're concerned with experimental design and research rigor, the location of those characters is randomized. So there'll be every different place, every different time that you play it. If you toggle on locked options, the 4 bottom options will become locked and the 4 top ones are unlocked. You can toggle on character pressure, and lovely Quincy there will point at something and go right beside it and suggest that you should pick that thing. There's also pop-ups and ads to artificial products that you don't actually spend any sort of money on. But here's a limited time character that you could pick if you tap to buy it now. Here's a parental control it'll take you to that approximates some of the sorts of parental controls that we saw in our content analyses, but no money is ever exchanged. And the ads that shows products aren't real products that you could ever purchase or hound your parents to buy you anyways, because they don't exist. But those are the sorts of things we can toggle on. So you may or may not see Quincy pointing at an option suggesting pick this one. You may or may not see locked options. On the screen, you may or may not see a pop-up to say, here's a limited time character you could buy. And that's the pop-up character that you could buy. Next, after you've picked your character, you need to pick a background for the scene. We're creating a story. We know who our protagonist is. We now need a background. Where they're going to be situated. Is it a castle? Is it a forest? Are they in the prehistoric era? Then there are 8 different options, and toggled on are locked options, whether Quincy's suggesting a particular thing. There aren't any ads that would appear on this particular screen. They appear in different places. And then you get to color them in. So the app will put them together to a line detection algorithm, and then you can tap to color it in as you like. There's a screen where you can drag stickers of different kinds on, and then at the very end, you get to narrate your story. And there are voice filters. So you can just narrate your story. It's in your voice. It'll record it. There it is. There's the scene. I've colored it in, my selections, and here's the story as I told it. Or I can turn my voice into a chipmunk. Or I turn my voice into a robot, and a robot's going to narrate the story, or a dragon, or all manner of different things. Here too, some of the voice options can be locked, or they're all unlocked. We then see an ad to an app that doesn't actually exist, so that we can investigate if, how, and for how long children will interact with an app. Do they just quickly hit the X? They've learned, I don't want to watch this, I don't care, and get rid of it. Or what does their interaction look like? And then at the end, if they want their story, they can send it to a location that they like. So we don't actually hold any of that data. All that's captured in the back end is entirely anonymized taps and times. What did they tap and when did they tap it? You would need to collect any information about who it was and what we know about who it was outside of the app, because it only does that master activity log. So our first study with this Giggle Scribbles app was for 6 weeks in the University of Wollongong's Early Start Discovery Space, which is a public access children's museum. We had a temporary digital exhibit where we set up some tables with 4 iPads that children could choose to play or not to play as they and the adults that they were with chose. So we set up these 4 tables. I wish I had taken a photo when it was set up, not when it was under construction. But 4 tables sat together with 4 different iPads that were mounted to those tables, and they were on. Each of those iPads had a different version of the app, though. Either all persuasive design off, all of that persuasive design on, just character pressure on, or just locked options on. So then we could start to, and it would be random which iPad you sit down at and play with. So you get to choose to play or not play as you wish, play for as long as you want. There was no, you must stay for 10 minutes, you must play for 5 minutes. And then it was random which iPad you sat down at and which condition you experienced. So the first question that we needed to ask is this of the sort of app that children would like to play? If we're going to capture the impacts of persuasive design in ways that we can generalize conclusions, even start to generalize conclusions to children's real world app play, it should be something that they like doing. And then we can see how that varies. If everyone stops after 30 seconds, then the study's dead in the water. Well, I can report that 554 children over those 6 weeks chose to play. No one asked them to play. No one encouraged them to play. There were no bright lights or signs saying, come here. There were just iPads on the floor in what was a big public access children's museum, and children could play or not play, or children or families could say, we're not doing that. We're doing something else as they wanted. But 554 children elected to play. The average play time was for 10 minutes. The average to create a story was about 6 minutes, or just over 6 minutes. So what we know is multiple children created more than one story. So they wanted to do it again. Some of the children played for up to 47 minutes during that time. In separate polling, 97% of children said that they liked the app, 71% liked it a lot. 57% completed more than one story. So we were sufficiently satisfied that children wanted to do this, and then we could get meaningful variability in what does persuasive design do. Now, we're still in the process of writing this up, so I'm sharing things before we've even got it in submission, but I find that they're really interesting results and really relevant to what we're talking about here. So hot off the presses. What we're finding is under conditions of multiple layered persuasive design features, when you turn everything on, children do play for longer, statistically significantly longer. In fact, when you have other persuasive design features like locked options or locked options plus character pressure, they play for significantly longer as well. One of the interesting things is if it's character pressure, so Quincy's suggesting particular things, children don't spend more time on a particular story. It looks like the play time of when everything's off, but they'll play more times. They'll do more stories than if everything is off or in other conditions. So it seems like if there's an ally there with you who's playing the game with you, a digital character who's interested in what you're doing, perhaps that's motivating you to come back and do more of it. Luckily, we're seeing that persuasive design is not always persuasive. They're not all created equal. Not all children go for locked options. In fact, children select a locked option less than you would expect by chance. If they were selecting them perfectly randomly, effectively ignoring that there was a lock on them at all, we would expect a particular rate at which locked options are selected. Children select locked options significantly less than that, which implies that we can learn some level of resistance to persuasive design, even early on. It's not quite as, I'm not quite as enthusiastic about it as I was initially when we first looked at the data, because still a fair number of children do go for those locked options. So we can learn, but 68% of the children still attempted some locked option. One of those children attempted it 26 times to try and get through the parental control. We're doing a parallel study at the moment in early childhood education and care services, so that we can also capture self-regulation and see how some of these things vary as a function of self-regulation, but some of the other surrounding data collection, like problematic media use and regulatory use of media and other variables of interest. Okay, I'll finish off on one last thing, which is I've presented some hot off the presses. I'm now going to present a future direction, a watch this space. And it's so what do we do about it? If we do take some heart that children have learned to resist some persuasive design features already, and we assume that we can learn to do these things, how do we go about learning to do these things? What do we do to support? There are a few approaches that seem to be effective, but they tend to be disjointed. They come from different disciplines. And they tend to be isolated strategies rather than a more comprehensive cluster of here's the things that you can do in different conditions. Things like if you have forced breaks in children's play, that tends to help transitions, or long forewarning that a transition's coming with reminders along the way. So there are isolated strategies that seem to have evidence that those are effective, but no sort of more comprehensive, what are the cluster of things I do in different situations. One of the other challenges is those approaches tend to be separated from children's digital engagement. That is, I'm going to talk to you about some things, or we're going to try some things. And then when you go and play, I want you to generalize those things to your digital play rather than those things being integrated. So there seems to be some opportunity there. There's also opportunity to pull together those different disciplines, human computer interaction that'll have some things to say about digital design, and what are the settings on the device that we might want to manipulate to our favor or to our children's favor. Self-regulation has some things to say about what's challenging and when it's challenging, and what do we do about that challenge. And of course, there's all sorts of insights from critical digital literacy and media literacy that we could learn from as well, but currently they're a bit disjointed. One of the approaches that we're currently undertaking is to repurpose Giggle Scribbles. That is, in the context of children's play, as a proof of concept, can we build in some of the sorts of strategies and supports and awareness that we would want children to have in the context of that play? For instance, if Quincy pops up and is encouraging a particular choice, we might switch from Quincy. He's too likable and cute to be the bad guy in this situation, but let's use Quincy for now. Quincy's encouraging a particular choice. Another character swoops in to say, "Hey, what are you doing? What is it that you wanted to choose?" Now, do you want to pick what that character is suggesting? Or so there's a package of identification and awareness, a package of strategies and approaches, and a bit of a circuit breaker to say, what is it that you want to do in return to what were you going to do anyways? And then making it okay that you pick the thing that you were going to do and not the thing that the device is trying to encourage you to do. And then being able to remove some of those supports and scaffolds over time and just bring them in as reminders when you need to. So I say watch this space because we're in the process of talking with the app developers about what we build and how we build it. But by the middle of the year, we should have a working prototype. I'll finish there. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.